The I word, as in impeachment, is on the lips of Democrats in the swamp. A new study shows nearly two-thirds of welfare recipients are immigrants. And are we witnessing serious civil unrest across the pond? All this and more on this week's Truth is Making a Comeback.
Truth is making a comeback. America's Top Stories with Lisa K. Donner.
The politics of impeachment. Well, it isn't even January, and the new emboldened 116th Congress is ready to pounce. Unsurprisingly, President Trump is their target. What is behind all this talk of campaign finance violations and impeachment? Joining me now is Chief Political Correspondent Graham J. Noble. Welcome to Truth, Graham.
My pleasure, Lisa.
Well, it certainly appears that a number of congressional Democrats are chomping at the bit to impeach President Trump. So why don't they just do it in 2019? Why are they in such a hurry?
Well, I think, Lisa, the first question they've got to ask themselves is, would they actually be able to successfully impeach the president? Now, even though they're going to have a majority in the House in the 116th Congress, the next Congress, the Republicans still control the Senate. And I think it's a fair bet to say that there is not a single Republican senator who is going to vote to convict President Trump. And there's probably even a couple of Democratic senators who would at least think twice before they did so. So I really don't think the Democrats want to go through the kind of symbolic nonsense, if you like, of impeaching Trump in the House only to have him acquitted in the Senate. It doesn't really serve their purposes. They want to go all the way. They want to remove him from office.
That's a good point. So if the Democrats, as you predicted, are going to impeach Trump in 2019, what's the long game here? What are they planning, given that they're obviously intending to disrupt and damage the Trump presidency as much as they can before the 2020 election?
Yes, well, basically, I think they are. They've got a kind of a three-pronged strategy going on here. I believe there are three parts of this plan that I foresee coming together.
Okay,
we're seeing the beginnings of all of them now.
All right. So, what do you think is the most important point?
Well, essentially, like I said, there's kind of a couple of different facets to it. One of them is definitely keeping the special counsel alive as long as they can. Now, I know a lot of people have been talking about that perhaps Robert Mueller is winding down his investigation. You know, he's getting close to wrapping it up. I don't necessarily think that's true. And I think the Democrats will try to do everything they can to keep the Mueller investigation actually going right through until 2020 into the election campaign.
I think that's very interesting. You're right about that. What do you have, well, basically, what do they have to gain about getting rid of Robert Mueller? And I think that's the most important point. What do you have for number two, Graham?
Well, alongside that, of course, is the flood of investigations that are coming down the pipeline in this new Democratic-controlled House of Representatives. And I think what they're going to do, and on the investigation side, I think it's like another prong of the attack, because what they're going to do with that is go after Trump as the president in terms of what he's done. They're going after the executive branch in general. They're gonna basically pick apart and litigate everything that the executive branch has done basically since Trump has become president. So they're going to be firing off subpoenas. They're going to be holding endless hearings. They're going to be dragging current and former cabinet members and also Trump family members, Jared Kushner, Don Jr., Ivanka. They're going to be dragging them all up in front of congressional committees, the Oversight Committee and the Judicial Committee, to grill them on everything that Trump has done so far.
Yeah, one of the points that you made in the article that I thought was so interesting, which I'm gathering as point number three, is that it's going to be hard to really mount a 2020 campaign because they're going to want to investigate anybody close to Trump. Can you expound on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, basically, and that is really the third prong of this strategy, if you like, which is actually creating a situation in 2020 where there is, from the Democrats' point of view, I'm not necessarily certain all of this is going to work out the way they want it, but this is the way I believe they're looking at it. By 2020, they would have essentially constructed a pressure cooker aimed right at the president and his administration, with the subpoenas and the hearings and the Mueller investigation still either continuing at that point, or at least the aftermath, the autopsy of it, if you like, continuing to go on. All of these things, plus the additional factor of the threat of impeachment after 2020, when the Democrats, I think, will be assuming that they're going to take control of the Senate, which is, of course, what they're going to need. Because in 2020, right, there are 21 Republican senators up for re-election and only 11 Democratic senators up for re-election. So I believe they think the landscape is in their favor. I think they think they're going to take control of the Senate. And of course, once they have control of the Senate, they would actually be able to impeach and convict and remove the president from office. And they're going to hold that over his head. And essentially, you know, long story short, the whole point of all of these things in conjunction is to really make it almost impossible for Trump to effectively even campaign for re-election.
Well, let me stop you there, Graham.
Let me stop you there. Toward the end of your article on this subject, you suggest that the Democrats are doing is basically a kind of advanced election rigging, a new definition of election rigging, in fact. Can you briefly expound on that?
Sure. I mean, basically, essentially what I mean by that is they have redefined the art of rigging an election. And what they're doing is they're doing it by laying the groundwork in advance to essentially completely handicap or possibly even eliminate from contention altogether the Republican candidate, who of course will be Donald J. Trump. And the way they're doing that is by this plan of attack, whereby they make it so difficult for him to even campaign for the presidency that he may just decide not to even run for a second term at all. Now, I'm not saying that Trump is the kind of guy that is going to just give up like that, but I think that is the Democrats' plan. Either make him quit before he even runs for a second term, or simply make it almost impossible for him to effectively campaign.
Fascinating stuff. I think you've really put your finger on it in terms of analyzing what the Dems are up to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
That's Graham J. Noble, Chief Political Correspondent, LibertyNation.com. Benghazi may be back. Based on a ruling by a federal judge this week, U.S. District Court Judge Royce Lamberth, a Reagan appointee, ordered both the Departments of Justice and State to comply with a FOIA, or Freedom of Information request, by none other than Judicial Watch. Lamberth doesn't seem to be joking around here and sounds like he expects both federal agencies to hop too. Joining me now is Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott D. Cosenza Esquire. Hi, Scott. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you.
Love that Liberty Nation t-shirt.
Thank you.
All righty. So is it just me, or is this whole Hillary Clinton thing not going away anytime soon, and maybe, in fact, heating up?
Well, that's exactly what just happened. The ruling by Royce Lamberth really heated it up quite a bit by basically calling out both Departments of State and Justice for being deceitful, and that's sort of the least of it. And their dealings with supplying this FOIA information that Judicial Watch is sued for.
Is it just me, or is this guy one of those take no prisoners judges?
Well, because of what happened in previous cases, I would say he is exactly the wrong judge. If you're a government lawyer and want to kind of, throw the carpet over some mess, he's not the guy for you.
That's interesting. Give me a little bit of history.
Well, he held 2 interior secretaries in contempt of court because of their rulings in mismanagement of American Indian funds that they were supposed to have held in trust. And he's called the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I believe, a racist institution. So he's a Reagan appointee, but he takes no truck from government officials who are doing dirt when they should be doing the people's business.
Well, let's face it, the BIA and the Bureau of Land Management are both a holy mess, so he's not too far off there. But basically, what is he ordered?
What he's ordered is for the State Department and the Justice Department to sit down with Judicial Watch and to come up with a production plan for discovery, where they will then go through and discover whether or not, through the looking at of emails and documents and other correspondence, whether or not the State Department illegally acted when they basically said, we have nothing to report for the initial information request. Let's recall, Lisa, this is about the Benghazi talking points that Susan Rice made on all 5 Sunday morning shows.
About the Islamic video?
That's what this case is about. What we presume is Susan Rice was giving these talking points to go and lie and call this terrorist attack. It was, so just for people who may not even know to this day because of the obfuscation, Benghazi was a coordinated terrorist attack on multiple U.S. Properties, and of course our personnel who were there. First ambassador to die in the line, I think, in 30 years at that point. So it was pretty big deal, and it was very inconvenient for the Obama administration, though, because they should have. Some people would say they should have prepared more for the anniversary of the September 11th and in the Islamic world. And if they were terrorist attack, then that makes them politically vulnerable in the upcoming elections. This was in September. The November election's not far away. So who told Susan Rice to go and basically say this was about some YouTube video rather than what the administration certainly knew at the time, that it was a terrorist attack? That's what this is about. This is about Judicial Watch trying to get at the root of that lie and discover its author. And go ahead.
All right. But Scott, can't they just cover this up and, get rid of a lot of information like Hillary Clinton did?
Well, not everybody, I think, is convinced that they will receive the same level of justice that Hillary Clinton does, which is to say that it seems like she can do simply anything at all and not suffer the fate of anything affecting her criminal interest. I'm sure that Justice Department and especially State Department lawyers will, maybe try to skirt around the edges of the law, but to have them actually destroy evidence or that kind of thing is probably a bit too far for most of those folks, Lisa. So while I take the gist of your question, I think they're probably, if there's some there to discover, I think some willing hands to go through the trash will discover the mess.
So is this guy alleging that state and federal authorities have essentially been involved in a cover-up?
I think his exact words were that it strains credulity to believe that the State Department lawyers who were claiming that they had done a thorough check of their records for Hillary Clinton emails did not know that Hillary Clinton, in fact, used a personal server and that most of her emails would never be discovered by any check. So I think it's fair to say yes to your question.
Well, Scott, when is all this going to take place?
Well, we've got a few more weeks or a few more days at this point, actually, until the initial response is due. Whether that will actually yield more substantive news for us to talk about is probably won't. But when these things come back and they're reported on, and the facts of what is revealed from these discovery requests, well, then we will certainly have a lot to talk about then, I presume.
Well, maybe this will all come to a head around Christmas, and then Bill can get Hill a pair of skates since she manages to skate all the time. Thanks so much for joining us. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yellow vest fever is sweeping Europe and shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. The protest started about a month ago in Paris over a carbon tax that the French government proposed. Now people are taking to the streets with a variety of concerns from a number of countries. Joining me now is Liberty Nation's Laura Volkovic, who is our socio-political correspondent. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so this yellow vest business is spreading across Europe. It started with Macron in France, and recently he had an address to the nation. He's already in somewhat of a hot water, isn't he?
He is. He really is. These protests began around a month ago in response to some carbon taxes he wanted to install. But it's been 4 weeks until he really addressed the people and put forward some solutions. So I don't know if those solutions will be enough for the French people to forgive him, but they're not happy.
One of his solutions really had me laughing in the aisle. You wrote, quote, reinvent and restore the educational system so that everyone can find work after graduating at an income capable of preserving dignity. Well, yeah, duh. I mean, that's just so absurd on its face. Of course, that's what every country wants. But the question is, how do you get there? And the answer doesn't seem to be socialism.
Yeah, well, the impression seems to be that the French people don't believe that they're getting enough income to really maintain, I guess you could say, dignity. Dignity was a big theme in his televised speech the other night. And it seems like, yes, he's got the idea of the general dissatisfaction, but he doesn't necessarily have the specifics for how to fix it.
But it's interesting because this yellow vest business, like you said, it's exploding all across Europe. The people have no firearms, so they're really getting the crap beat out of them. Isn't that essentially true?
To some degree. I mean, it's true that there have been quite a few instances of police brutality. A lot of videos are coming out with quite shocking scenes of police and paramilitary as well, which they have in France, pretty much abusing people who are unarmed. But at the same time, the people are kind of getting quite violent even without firearms. They're looting, smashing up shops and restaurants, setting fire to cars. So they are causing quite a bit of havoc.
So basically, do you see this as a situation where it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better? Or is it just going to continue spreading across Europe?
Well, now that Macron's put his solutions forward, it's hard to say. I guess we'll see next weekend if there are more people out on the streets protesting. I'd say even if it goes away, it's only going to be temporary because a lot of the underlying issues are still kind of bubbling away across Europe. So we might see a temporary kind of ceasefire, but it probably won't last forever.
So if you had to enumerate, let's say the undeniable issues, what would they be?
I would suggest they don't believe the government has their interests at heart. There's definitely a feeling that the government is there just to be rich and in charge without any real concern for the people. And number two, probably migration seems to be a pretty major issue.
Well, what about taxes?
Yes, I'd say taxes definitely, but that kind of ties into the feeling of the rich versus the poor, the inequality in society.
Well, thank you so much. That's Laura Volkovic reporting from the United Kingdom on LibertyNation.com. Thanks for joining us today, Laura.
Thank you.
If you're wondering why the Democrats want more immigrants, look no further than a new study that shows 63% of welfare households in the United States are headed by, you guessed it, non-citizens. This means the Dems can keep their base firmly under their thumb. It's a veritable twofer for them. People who will continue to vote for them to keep getting their checks, and those they can control. And let's face it, the left loves nothing more than people they can control. Joining me now is Joe Schaefer, who wrote an article about this for LibertyNation.com. Welcome to Truth is Making a Comeback, Joe.
Thank you.
It's 21 degrees here in the swamp, and
It feels cold down here. I don't know what the weather is, but I feel a little chilly.
oh boy. So you wrote about an interesting study. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, sure. It's actually a very outrageous story. The Center for Immigration Studies studied U.S. Census Bureau data and determined that 63% of households in America headed by non-native citizens are on some form of welfare. We were told that immigrants coming here enrich us, the diversity enriches us. Instead, they're proving to be a burden on the U.S. taxpayer. And what's really upsetting about it is the longer they're here, the more proportionally they go on welfare. So non-citizen households who have been here less than 10 years, the rate is 50%. Non-citizen households who have been here more than 10 years, it goes up to 70%. So the longer they're here, the more likely they are to get on welfare programs that the taxpayer has to carry the burden for. So there's obviously the system's broken. This immigration is not enriching us. It's proving to be a burden, and it's a big scandal. I think the taxpayers should be outraged.
But for the Democrats, this is really a thing of beauty. I mean, they've got their built-in voting bloc. They're dependent on them. This is really politically a very good thing for the Dems.
It is for them. You look at the midterm elections, Georgia and Florida, they basically had a policy of getting out the immigrant vote to help progressive coalition, two radical candidates for governor, and they almost won both those races. So we're looking at a demographic future here. If we keep allowing these immigrants to come in, they're on welfare, so they're going to vote for the party that's giving them more welfare, and that's the Democrats. And we're going to see these states in Georgia and Florida may soon go the way of California, maybe not right away, but 10 years from now. And, you know, the Democrats are getting, apparently, their plan seems to be working.
Okay, you also talk a little bit about the native-born Americans and what this means for them.
Well, it's a yellow vest moment. It really is. If Trump can't pull through his reforms where he wants to screen for we can only have immigrants come in here who are not going to be a burden on the taxpayer, if that doesn't happen, it's going to be like France, where France are having these protests because the lower classes and the middle classes, native-born French, they're carrying all this burden for these elites who want these migrants, want these immigrants, because they provide cheap labor for their corporate donors. And like you said, they provide voters for the big government types who want to stay in power. We better get a handle on this, or we're going to have protests here. And I think the taxpayers should protest because they are carrying the burden for their lives becoming more difficult. It's a really high outrage thing, and more Americans should be livid about it.
Thank you very much for your time. That's Joe Schaefer, Liberty Nation national correspondent hailing from Florida. Thanks for joining us today, Joe.
Thanks.
And now for my parting shot. Two disparate events occurred this weekend that have served to reveal quite a bit about our priorities. patriotism, and purpose as a people. First, figures released by the U.S. Department of Labor reveal the national unemployment rate has held its 50-year low at 3.7%. While the economy is roaring at a breakneck pace, the leftist media is running amok with wall-to-wall coverage of President Trump's alleged Russian collusion. TV and left-wing internet news operations are in the throes of a feeding frenzy, acting as if it were their patriotic duty to stick a knife into the Trump presidency and twist it. Impeachment is all the Democrats can seem to discuss all day, every day. Lest we forget, it's the Trump administration that has woken the sleeping giant and stimulated our economy into the stratosphere. Just take a gander at your individual retirement account or 401k, and you can see the numbers bear this out. This outstanding economic news was buried over the weekend because the advocacy media has been agog over Robert Mueller and company. It's all due to the political synergy of the Trump the candidate who, back in 2015, refused a meeting with Russian nationals. Yeah, that's right. This alleged event never took place. It means nothing, not a zip. Nothing happened. Then there are the alleged campaign finance violations, according to the president's former attorney, who is an admitted liar. Mr. Trump, before he was president, directed 2 separate hush payments to women with which he had dalliances. Whether Trump was engaged in these affairs or not, the American public has shown that it is not terribly interested in his sexual behavior. If we did, the Access Hollywood tape would have done Trump in a long time ago. Again, we must come to the obvious conclusion that the significance of these events affecting your life is essentially a big fat zero. On the other hand, even casual observers can see that a lot is happening in our country as a result of the Trump presidency. Are we willing to stop making a mountain out of the proverbial molehill of meaningless non-events and look around at what really and truly is happening in America? The advocacy media seems intent on killing the goose that laid the golden egg, and for what? Their vitriol seems rather pointless considering what is genuinely going on under a Donald J. Trump administration. This much we know: the lives of all Americans, from blacks to Latinos to the disabled, and everyone in between, have improved in the last 2 years. But the left's hold on the major media outlets in this country has become nothing short of an iron grip. Their priorities are completely out of whack as a result of Trump derangement syndrome.
They dare me to say impeach him. Today I say impeach 45.
The elitist Fourth Estate act as if it were their patriotic duty to bring down this president. They don't care one whit whether it's morning in America, because they're on a mission to destroy this presidency at all costs. What the media is up to is not patriotism by way of rooting out the bad guys. It is treason. And that's my parting shot. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com. Thanks so much for joining us on Truth is Making a Comeback.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at LibertyNation.com.